Hey TCSTV viewers, it's Evelyn and Dave coming to you from the camera store live tonight because we have a very special TCSTV live broadcast. We have the one and only, well, two and only, I should say, Fuji Guys from the YouTube channel. We have Billy and Francis on the call with us tonight. And so we're going to be talking some Fuji stuff. And that is because Fujifilm just did their X Summit in Japan earlier today, and they announced a lot of stuff. I think this might have been your biggest announcement day ever in the history of Fujifilm. But there was a ton of stuff announced, including there was a bunch of lenses with the lens roadmap, some exciting stuff for both X series and GFX. There was a very exciting GFX camera announced, which we're mostly going to be talking about tonight. Some camera updates, and then the last but not least thing that they mentioned at the very end was the development of a brand new stacked CMOS sensor.
Finally. Oh, it's good.
Yeah, it's nice to see a new sensor, and so we'll get into that shortly, but I just want to let all the viewers know a couple of things just as people are joining. This event is tied into our 25th anniversary. It is the camera store's 25th anniversary of being in business in Calgary, and so we have lots of events coming up all month long, lots of promo specials, things like that. All the details are at thecamerastore.com, and Fujifilm is actually sponsoring one of the events with Justine Milton, who's an amazing portrait and wedding photographer. She's based in our area, and she happens to use the Fujifilm GFX system. She used to be a film photographer, and she transitioned over to Fujifilm GFX. And so she's going to talk about using the system for portrait photography. So that's coming up. You can get all the details. It's going to be next Thursday night at 7 p.m. Mountain Daylight Time, and the info is at thecamerastore.com. So let's bring on our guests here and say hi to Billy and Francis. Hey, guys.
Hi everyone, and thanks for having us again.
No, we always look forward to having you guys online.
Yeah, and normally, of course, we sometimes like to bring you guys in town to do stuff, but right now we're doing so many virtual things, so we appreciate the opportunity to have a discussion and talk a little bit of tech tonight.
Yes.
So, of course, the standout for us was the GFX 50S 2. And we had a chance to test a pre-production unit ourselves. We really enjoyed using the camera. We were able to test a lot of features with it. We got a good opportunity. But of course, we have more questions, so we want to chat with you guys about it. Before we get into it, though, can you tell us a little bit about the direction with Fujifilm and coming up with a new sensor for APS-C? Why should people be excited about a stack sensor?
Yeah, I mean, the as you mentioned, the most exciting part was actually at the end, and they were saying goodbye, and then they said, "Oh, by the way, we're going to be launching a stacked BSI CMOS sensor in conjunction with our X-trans filter array." And obviously, that's very exciting because if you are following Fujifilm cameras, you would know that pretty much all the cameras that we launch were basically, having that same fourth generation technology, right? Mm-hmm. Still very good. And, for most people, in fact, it's probably going to last, several years down the road. But stacked BSI sensors really is about speed, right? And speed really opens up lots of avenues, both from a photo side, but also from a video side. So from a video side, for us, it's very exciting, and I'm sure for you guys as well, is that, speed of the sensor is going to allow for faster readouts. And that's going to, offer things like, basically non-existent rolling shutter, which is a common issue when you start panning and doing footage. And then you can get, potentially, higher resolution because of the faster readout of that sensor. So that is some exciting news, but that needs to also be paired with processor as well. So we're hoping to see some next generation processor in the mix there.
If that's, and then do you think they're going to make all the filming simulations available with X series? Comment on that?
I think that what I've seen so far was every time they've developed something, they've always incorporated that latest development, right? And we kind of saw this actually with the XS10 when it launched, and it got certain features that even the XT4 didn't get, right? And it was just because it's being developed constantly by the R&D team in Japan. So who knows? We'll still have to sit and wait and see from that. But yeah, very excited about stacked CMOS. and hopefully, we don't wait too long. Hopefully, sometime next year, right?
Yeah. And then in terms of the lens roadmap, so we got the full information about two lenses, two X series f1.4 lenses. There's a 23 millimeter and a 33 millimeter lens. So those are very exciting. And then of course in the lineup itself, it's nice to know what's coming down the pipeline. And for GFX, there's going to be some tilt shift lenses.
Yes.
But we don't know f-stops yet, right?
Well, we don't know the focal length or the f-stop, so we just know a tilt shift is coming. But a lot of people have been asking for it, so it's great to finally hear that, somewhat a confirmation that it's really coming native to the mount, right? So
Yeah.
really
I
exciting.
think it's going to be a very popular lens. Yeah, because there is a lot of people that are looking forward to that.
Absolutely. Okay, well, let's get into this GFX camera. This is kind of a different announcement for Fujifilm in that there wasn't a lot of like brand new features that came out with this camera, but it's sort of like a refined version where it's hitting a much lower price point. And looking at this camera, it's actually significantly less at launch than its predecessor was. So can you give us kind of the high-level overview of the features that this camera has, and then we can get into some questions.
Yeah. Do you want me to go, Billy? I don't want to cut you.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you can definitely talk about some of the features, but Evelyn, you mentioned about price, and when we launched the 50S, I think it was $7,000 at the time, and so this camera here is at $5,000 Canadian or 4,000 US. It's quite impressive, right? And so I think that almostly right there is a feature in itself, somewhat, right? And we talk about value, and we always think price being what value is about, but actually value is what the customer gets, and if it's providing features that customers want. And I think that's where, Francis, you can talk about some of those features that we find customers do want in our system, especially this new 50S too.
Yeah. So, well, first of all, to me, one of the huge thing is the size and the weight. So we get a significantly smaller camera body. The ergonomics is great, and again, 900 grams. It's quite light, and you can just go on a walk and bring a medium format camera with you. It's not really any bigger than any full frame camera. But also the fact
that I had to check my bag because I was worried it wasn't in there. I was like, this feels a little light, but you're right. It's
very small. It's unobtrusive. Like when I first got the 100S, which is the same body essentially, I went on a walk with my dog with the 100S. Around my neck, taking pictures. So it's just like, again, the portability, but also the big thing is the fact that we have Embody image stabilization now, which is something that people are getting used to have, and now we have that into a lower priced GFX camera. So really nice to have for sure. So these are kind of my standouts, and the fact that we have the X processor 4 in it improves the autofocus as well, and we get over like 70 features that we were seeing on X and GFX cameras with the X processor 4.
Yeah, so I guess in stark contrast, right? The 100S is obviously a more modern sensor and has phase detection, but the price point that you're looking at there is about a $3,000 difference, right? And if you're into that and you can spend that, absolutely, I in a heartbeat go that route. But what we get value from this product is that it is $3,000 less, but it doesn't skimp on things, as you mentioned, like IBIS. It has dual slot cards that are ultra high speed, has the top panel, has all the controls, and really, there's nothing that's been taken away. And a lot of companies you'll find, they'll launch something and they'll take something away, and really, it's this whole value proposition is brought down to this extremely low level, and then we throw in this little kit lens to go with it as well, for basically $500 more, and it really gives you a complete solution. And honestly, if you thought about, I don't know, 6-7 years ago about medium format, like who would think like medium format would be sort of like this thing that even people that are
Enthusiasts.
enthusiasts that are getting into it, like would even have, right, as an option to do photography. It's usually left with those doing commercial, right? And I think Fuji's really paved the way in that. And I think that's where the value of this product is. And it gives customers choice, right? And I think that's one of the benefits that people don't see is that they see products and they think it has to be the best thing. But sometimes the best thing is like $10,000, right? And so by giving customers choice, I think this is where the 50S2 really fits into this lineup where if you're doing landscapes, you're doing photography, you're doing sort of like portraits that are not obviously running around. This is a perfect
Controlled
camera to get
portraits,
into,
yeah.
right? Once you start moving, having moving subjects, panning a little bit, then you have the 100S, and then of course, if you're in a studio environment, then the original GFX 100 would probably be the better bet. Having a tilt adapter, having a built-in integrated grip, because you're going to be tethering and such. So that's really where the reason why this camera was launched is to give sort of great opportunities for someone that's new that wants to get into it. And we're not saying, hey, listen, throw away your full frame camera, throw away everything else. And it's not. It's really a compliment, right, to someone's tool.
One of the questions that we saw earlier today was to do with the image stabilization mechanism. So this is giving you the ability to do the multi-shot. You get 200 megapixel images that Dave is very excited about. But do you see in the future that mechanism being able to be used for doing like handheld high res, or is it just with this particular camera with the hardware going to stick to being like a tripod only feature?
Yeah, so let me answer that, Francis. I guess the direction of the development team was about providing accurate color, right? And so the way the pixel shift works on the camera to get higher resolution is to take 16 shots, right? And by doing so, you have each color in every single pixel, and that causes issues with actually handheld, right? That delay, because it's moving in microns, and it's any like type of shake, it's gonna basically throw it off. And so potentially there's an option to reduce that, right? And some other systems only do a 4-shot, and that would definitely pave the way for potential handheld high resolution. But you give away the accuracy in color, because now each site needs to be interpolated, right? Versus having colors for each pixels. So
okay, well, I mean, that brings up a really good point. Just in regards to the importance of color fidelity, and how Fujifilm handles color processing. And I think this is one area that's not really talked about very much when looking at this camera, and people are thinking of comparisons that you can make on the market. But Fujifilm has such strong roots with film, and I mean, whether or not you use film simulations in camera, or you just use some of the standard settings, Fuji has an excellent way of processing skin tones and color. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the foundations of that, and the thought that's gone into the system.
Yeah, absolutely. I just didn't know if Francis wanted to talk. I can give a backstory, because I had the opportunity to actually talk with the the R&D team that is in development of Fujifilm's color science, right? Back in the days of film, in order to get basically an idea of how color is represented and appreciated, Fujifilm actually sent several sample prints out with different skin tones of different different people, and they sent it to each country. And each country, there's always this different perception, right? Like, let's say Asian countries like more like white and bright, and that's why you get this, nice crisp look. And in other countries, they like more warmth, right, into it. And so we were able to kind of take that science and bring it back from the film days by all that knowledge, and put that back into sort of, the digital age of making film, and converting that. And that's kind of where our color science actually started through. And then, of course, when it came to, taking that into our digital camera realm, obviously, it was a little bit easier for us to actually do that. And if we talk about color accuracy, I think you can take basically a measurement of light, measure a scene, and give you accurate colors. The problem with that is the accuracy in colors that doesn't tend to always be very pleasing, right? Because sometimes it's very dull, and so what the designers have done, or the R&D team have done, was talked about, and I think Japan says this a lot about memory color. And what they really mean is that if you picture, you know, back the days when you were a kid and you went to a picnic with your family, let's say, you remember that day in your mind, very vividly, in the sense that, the sky was this beautiful blue, the grass was, green. And that's kind of what we're trying to translate into it, right? And on that day, probably the grass wasn't that green, the blue wasn't so vibrant, but
Yeah.
that's
You're wearing the sunglasses, the beautiful sunglasses. In
so
your dreams, Billy.
that's the color memory that Japanese talk about when it comes to development. So that's why for me, ASTI is one of my favorite film simulations, because it does give me that magical blue, that I sort of hope would be the scene for it. And then from I guess a color science standpoint, maybe I can just pass it on to Francis for any further thoughts.
Well, yeah. I mean, the film simulations are a big part of the Fujifilm cameras, and I think that's why Fujifilm has put a lot of work into the JPEG engine, where I feel as onto other camera brands, and that's not a negative. The JPEGs is more as a preview, because in their mind is that people are going to use the RAW only anyways, so the JPEG is like somewhat of a preview. But the fact that Fujifilm has put a lot of work into giving you very pleasing colors and details into the JPEGs, people caught on that and started, shooting RAW plus JPEG and be like, oh, well, my JPEGs are good. I don't have to really touch them. They're good to go.
Yeah.
And then from there, some people even only shoot in JPEG. I like to have myself a little bit of a backup, but shooting RAW and JPEG is a good way of, like, if you let's say you're on the shoot, if you work with your camera and you get paid, obviously you're going to shoot in RAW because you need that assurance. But let's say you do a photo shoot with friends and you shoot RAW and JPEG, and you don't want to spend hours retouching images, while you could be good to go with just the JPEGs if you expose your scene properly.
Definitely. And if you're someone that is working with your camera and you have, say, commercial clients or even wedding clients, it is also nice that you have the film simulations while you're shooting, and so you can show kind of what that final product is going to look and if it's going to match a nice aesthetic. And then, afterwards you still have the RAW files, and then you can fine-tune them a bit. But you mean out of camera, that's something that a lot of other, medium format cameras, you're not going to get that same effect. So I think there's a use case for working professionals too to take advantage of those.
That was the first time I've heard of the Japanese memory colors, which is
that's cool. Yeah,
it's very, very interesting. Though I must not dream in colors, because I love the Acros profile in this. I find whatever Fuji camera I'm shooting with, I'm in black and white a lot, and I love it. Absolutely love it.
Yeah,
it's funny because you say that and Billy says Astia and the vivid memories, and then to me I'm just thinking I love classic chrome. Am I like too dramatic? I like soft colors and desaturated. But yeah, that's I can relate to that, memory colors, that how you picture that moment. It probably was dull, but in your mind it's like it was so happy and everything that it's vivid, right?
Yeah, and I think that does speak to the magic factor, right? There is something about Fujifilm images, and a lot has to do with the color science, but then also just the optics in general. And with this new kit lens, it's a clean lens. It's nice, it's sharp, it's good. And I think one of my favorite lenses of all time is the 110 GFX lens. It's just gorgeous. And so I was just shooting my kids with it, and it's just creamy bokeh. It's a beautiful portrait lens. And so I think, again, getting access to the lineup of GFX lenses that do have some unique properties to them a little bit of character sometimes, but they do definitely have that unique look.
Yeah, and Billy, I mean, this 3570, it's not a very expensive lens. I wasn't expecting as much from it, but it performed really, really well.
Yeah, because for me, I love the weight of it actually and the size of it.
Yeah.
And then I went back and I stuck in like the 250, right? And I was like, oh my god, this thing is huge.
Why would you do that, Billy? Why would you pick the biggest lens you
Give me
possibly
back my
could?
kit zoom lens.
Yeah,
Well,
so
it's a very exciting kit lens. Sorry, Evelyn.
oh, it's okay. It's very exciting.
But I got it, and then I was super excited because it's tiny. The fact that it's retractable, and then the image quality is good as well. So it's a really good way to get into the system. Sometimes it's like you buy a camera, but you need a lens to go with it. And that's when it gets tricky. But now you get a good package you can get in for, not a whole lot of money considering what
I don't think
you
I've ever
get.
heard the words like medium format kit lens. Right?
Yeah. That's crazy. So we talked a lot about some of the features that are advantages with the system. Now to hit that lower end price point, we haven't really gone into some of the sacrifices that have come with this. Now, as you see, there hasn't been a lot that has been taken away, but we do have to touch on it with the video capabilities of
video?
this camera. Now, it has physically a lot of the boxes checked in terms of the ports. You have a headphone jack, you have a microphone jack, all of that, but it's only shooting in 1080 HD video. So what was the thinking there? Was this camera kind of designed to not really hit the video market, or what's the use case?
The limitation really is the sensor, right? And as we talked earlier about the stacked BSI CMOS sensor, the readout speed really plays a role in the quality that we can get out of that sensor. And so this being sort of really customized sensor, but sort of an older technology, it doesn't have that speed capabilities, and so we can't get beyond full HD. And then on top of that, the readout speed, really causes issues with, again, rolling shutter, as you have seen in your videos, and Chris and Jordan have seen in the videos as well. And we know that. I mean, it's basically a 1/8 readout of the sensor. And so 1/8 it's ridiculous when it comes to blurring as it reads through the line. So definitely not a video camera. And I think if you are buying this camera because that's what you're doing, I probably wouldn't go that route. The XT4 or even the XT3 might be a better choice and save you a lot more money. And so it wasn't really the idea of trying to take away something out of this camera. It was just the limitations of a sensor. And this is why we are super excited about, stacked PSI, right? That's going to be sort of, 5th generation and very exciting. And we talked about color science too, and I forgot to mention, like white balance, I think it's also something to play a role in all this. I know with RAW, you can get all the images to look all alike as much as you can, but one of the strengths that Fujifilm does do is the auto white balance. And for most scenes, it does a really great job. In fact, so good that I always pretty much shoot with auto white balance, aside from when we film videos, of course, right? And I think, there's a few other companies that do that well, but, I think that's kind of sometimes how people perceive the color science to be just a little better because of that. And so I think Fujifilm is going in and developing, that in depth in the future. And we'll probably see things like machine learning come into white balance and to kind of develop that. Hopefully that the new generation can bring that type of technology for future models.
Okay. Well, let's talk a little bit about who this camera in Fujifilm's mind is designed for. I mean, the internet, they sometimes can be harsh and they say like, this isn't the newest technology, but who do you guys have in mind for like the optimal GFX 50S2 user?
Well, I think, if you look at photography students that want a medium, because this used to be a dream, right? Like this used to be impossible. but now it is. So like students in photography school, but landscape photographers, portrait photographers, like even though this is an older sensor, like I always say this, like the GFX 50S, the first one, as the time go, the image won't degrade. It's always going to be the same, and it's amazing. So it's a medium format image. It's a look. It's really good. So yeah, I mean, it's amazing. Like so. So if you shoot landscape and portrait, the only sort of, I would say, hold back on this camera is the autofocus, which is because we're used to the GFX 100S, which we came out with phase detection autofocus, which is really fast. But me and Billy, we shot our video 2 weeks ago, and then we hadn't really, well, I didn't shoot the 100S for a while, and then I picked this 50S2, started shooting, and then I was expecting to be, missing shots and things, because in my mind was like, oh, the 100S is so good. This can't be, right? And then I didn't notice anything, and my images were really sharp. And again, the focus as well, that new lens 35 to 70 is really fast. That's what I found. So yeah, I mean, if you shoot landscape, there's nothing moving really fast. You shoot portrait, nothing moving really fast.
Can I tell you guys, like mountains don't run as quick?
We live in Alberta, so we see them running all the time. But no, I mean, I would agree for the most part. I would say it's definitely lens dependent. And so with this new kit lens, it's the contrast detect autofocus system seemed to work a lot faster with moving subjects, even when it was kind of just a lot of, like head turning type stuff. But when you do move on to some of the bigger lenses, I mean, there's just so much more optics to move around in order to hit focus. And so, yeah, it's so shallow depth of field too. So you only have such a thin area that you are going to nail focus in.
Yeah, I mean, I find it's more like a little bit of a slower pace of photography. It's not, it's, obviously with the frame rate too, I'm not shooting sports in action, it's not that kind of thing. But if you are doing portraits, doing landscape, things that are taking a little more time setting up with, then the autofocus works great, that part of it.
Yeah. So my only dream thing with this camera is that I want the dials. I want the dials. I don't want this panel. We can lose that. But I would love the dials. And we did get some questions, and I know you can't comment on like future products or anything like that.
Well, you can if you want.
But it's, yeah, you can tell us. We won't tell anybody. But no, there's obviously a lot of excitement, and Fujifilm lovers, like the R form factor as well. But I have to say that even though this is the S, kind of more of like the SLR style camera, I do find that the form factor is really nice. And because it's so much more compact than the originals, it is a nice feel. And I personally like where the EVF is lined up here. We should touch a little bit on how the electronic viewfinder stacks up within the GFX lineup. The actual magnification is a little bit less than the 50S, but it's still competitive with a lot of other cameras on the market. Can you just talk a little bit about what settings you have, and if there's anything you do to optimize the view through the electronic viewfinder?
Yeah, I mean, the viewfinder, so we have 3.69 million dots, which is pretty good. And we know as technology evolves, like if you go back 3 years, 3.69 was like, right? But it goes really fast. And then to me, once you hit that point, I feel like maybe 2 point whatever, I don't personally feel like there's a big difference in terms of like what I'm looking at, and that's just me personally. But we do have a little bit less frames per second in terms of the refresh rate compared to the 100S. So we have 50 frames per second compared to 80 on the 100S. But again, for the type of photography you'll probably be doing with this, which is most likely portrait, landscape, and things like that, I don't feel like it's an issue. It's not for me anyway. And I'm being totally honest, but some people will want like 120 frames per second, and if it's not and that's okay.
I mean, with regards to that, is that something that you can address in firmware, or is that a hardware limitation to that?
That's again a limitation of basically the sensor's readout, right? So because the sensor handles things like autofocus, it also handles live view, and so whatever the sensor can pull out, aside from processor being involved in it, there's still that limitation. This is what we're seeing right here. And you guys made a good point of, you're panning with a subject or a model. You might not want to look at this camera per se, right? But if you are doing school photography, and kids are lining up each one and taking shots, right? So you can get blow up big prints. Or if you're doing fine art and again, things that are, more static than anything, but it's all about image quality at this point. This is where this camera really excels in, right? And that's really the target there. And that's why, again, we go back to having choices, in the medium format realm or larger format size sensors, you got, the 50S too, and then you want speed, you got the 100S, and then you want, again, a more studio experience that has some better ergonomics for that category. Then you got the GFX 100.
A few questions from the audience here. Mark is asking if this is a BSI sensor, and I'm not sure if maybe he's also referring to the other announcement, which we had a couple other comments of people saying that they wanted to know more about the new sensor we talked about earlier in the show. This will be available for replay, so you guys can catch some of that chat after the fact. But can you just, I guess, explain what type of sensor this actually is?
On the 50S?
On the 50S, yeah.
Yeah, the 50S is basically a CMOS sensor, right? It's not stacked. It's not a backside illuminated. And so let's just take a quick comparison between the 100/100S sensor and this particular sensor. They're both CMOS sensors, of course. CMOS sensors generally have a native ISO of 200 around, but you can play around with that, or the engineers can play around with that, and by sliding this up and down, you can control dynamic range a little bit. So if you have lower ISO, then you will decrease dynamic range. But saying that, those two sensors have completely different technology, right? You got backside illuminating, meaning the wiring is behind the photo site. And so when the sensor itself is collecting electron or light, you're not going through wires, and therefore that noise that's caused, and so you do get better, quality when it comes to high ISO, low noise, right? And potentially, better dynamic range as well. And then you look at this sensor right here, and if we look at the, the noise on it, it's rated at, 2.5 E, right? And what that really means, and then in comparison, the 100S is rated at 1E. And what it means is that naturally, every image you shoot, doesn't matter on base ISO, there will be noise at that level. But the thing is, though, the noise can't be seen because the signal is very high. And so as you bring up the ISO higher, higher, and higher, you'll see the noise being introduced on an older sensor that's not BXI, and you start seeing that. On comparison, the 100/100S sensitivity or its noise control, its signal, again, it has very low noise, right? But because the photo sites themselves are smaller than the older sensor, then the noise starts to come in at lower ISO, right? And so 100 megapixels versus 50, it ends up balancing itself between the two. And so in terms of noise capabilities, even though we think the sensor is older, it actually has very similar characteristics. And so they both still have great dynamic range, 14 stops. And the noise, even though it's an older sensor, but because it's a bigger photo site, the signal noise ratio is much higher than that of the 100 and the 100S. And so, so just talking about technology, it really, honestly, from an image quality standpoint, you are really getting pretty much sort of modern technology, but in a different way. You know, it's like you know, you have a big giant cup, you know, and then you have, you know, multiple smaller cups, right? And so the multiple smaller cups, you know, with the bigger cup, you collect more in that same amount of time, and that's just kind of the laws of physics somewhat. I don't
So
know
I
if I
guess
confused
then
the heck
that's,
of
I guess,
everybody, but
the long.
I feel like giving an applause on that.
Yeah, that was very good. No, I
Basically.
appreciate that technical answer, and that's why we're here tonight, is to hear the technical reasons behind some of the decisions with this camera. And of course, I mean, one of the things that's often brought up is, yeah, this is a 7-year-old sensor. But what you're saying is that, you know, when you're looking at the actual item that's being used to capture light, that maybe it doesn't necessarily make that big of a difference when you compare it with your other cameras in the same lineup.
yeah, and like I said again, like BSI technology is developed to improve things like noise, but you know, as you start stuffing more megapixels in, that signal to noise ratio changes, right? And so you know, I think for a lot of people who haven't experienced medium format, this 50S2 really is a great opportunity to get in and not break the bank. And I guarantee you, you'll be very happy with the quality, right? And pair that with these amazing GF lenses, and it's really stunning. I know we did a shoot maybe several years ago where we sort of had like an XT, I think 3 at the time, set up to do a stage shot with some portraits, and then the next photographer came in and shot with the GFX. And you know, I thought that the XT3 was so great, so sharp on the screen. And then when the person that had the GFX came in and shot, it was like, oh my God, where was this from? And it was just absolutely stunning, just moving up a little bit to see not just the camera, but the lens that creates even more resolution. And so this is a good reason why Fuji's developing these new lenses like the XF33 and XF23, because they can resolve higher resolution than the existing lineup that's there. And I think that's really beneficial for our system because it really prepares us, you know, for the future.
So, Francis, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about just the experience of using GFX and what it's like for people, say, if they're moving up from an X series camera into the GFX system. What are some of the things that are going to be familiar to them, and what are some of the things that are going to be different and exciting?
Well, if you come from, let's say, the X series line of camera to the GFX system, the good thing is that you won't be sort of lost because the menu interface that you're used to is still there. Your film simulation, most of them or more, will be there. So, you know, somewhat the color science is going to remain the same, but what you will get, and then I can remember that exact moment when I first got the GFX 50S before it came out, and then I started shooting it, and obviously I couldn't post any pictures because it was before it came out, but I did a shoot with my friends, and then I wanted to give them the pictures, so I shot both with X series and GFX, and then I was just looking at the two, like the same setup and everything, and I was just looking at the two images from X series and GFX, and I was like, this makes no sense. Like the GFX, the medium format images are like, they pop, the sharpness is like incredible. So, you know, if you're looking for that ultimate resolution and image quality, this is what you get when you jump into the GFX system. And as Billy mentioned before, you know, we have that 50 megapixel sensor, 100 megapixel sensor, but the lenses that go with it are really important as well because they have a resolving power as well. So if I have 100 megapixel with a lens that's resolving 20 megapixel, I can zoom in to 100%. I won't see any pixels, but I will get a glowy image. I will get, you know, if I crop in to 20 megapixel, for example, I'm going to have a crop of an image. Whereas when I have these high resolution lenses with a high resolution sensor, if I crop my image from 50 to 25, I have a 25 megapixel image and not a crop of a 50. That's kind of how I see it. And that's very beneficial.
Because of how the lens resolves?
Yeah. Yeah, so the GF lenses, you know, most of them are designed for 100 megapixel. They're designed to resolve that, amount of pixels. So when you zoom in, you get that crisp image. And I remember, again, zooming in the first time on 100 megapixel
Yeah.
with the 120 mil macro lens and be like,
But also a lot of people don't know, like medium format does have this like it's really about the gradation, right? Like the in film, we call it the D max, right? And so it really has this beautiful transition that just can't be done. And as much as we would say, yeah, no, our X series cameras are great, like large sensors do have like benefits, definitely, but with those you have trade-off, right? And that's always going to be things like size and weight and potentially cost. But I think again, the 50S2 here really is a perfect opportunity for those to kind of experience this, what people saw back shooting medium format, right? And seeing this gradation in the image.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I was going to ask a question from the audience about the lens. Can the 35 to 70, the new lens, resolve 100 megapixels?
That's one information I don't have. Billy, you might have that.
Yeah, all the lenses are designed. So, we understood that, it wasn't just specifically for this camera, though it's perfectly paired. This is going to work excellent with the GFX 100 and 100S with the 100 megapixel sensor.
I used it on the 100S because when I got this camera, the RAW files were not supported. So I wanted to try the lens, and I didn't want to say it can resolve or not because officially I didn't know, like, truly. But in seeing the images, I was like, yeah, that's really good. I shot some images of like bees on a flower and with this very kit lens, and I was like, okay. And you can actually see these in our video. But yeah, it definitely works really well, and also has like minimum focus breathing, which is great for video. So maybe not with this 50S2 because, as we said before, it's not optimal for video, but the 100S is great for video. So putting that lens on it could be a good pair as well, definitely.
So, there's a lot of cameras on the market now that have higher resolution in like 35 millimeter, and we have some fantastic optics out there. So like for me, it's the aesthetics of medium format. I don't know if you can touch on that a little bit more. Why would somebody want to spend the same amount of money on like a high resolution 35 millimeter lens or system compared to going to medium format? What are they going to get straight off the bat? Is there enough of a difference?
Yeah, I think to say what they're not going to get, right, is they're not going to get some of the performance that they expect, right? And we see this obviously with micro four thirds cameras, APS-C, and then full frame as technology moves up and scales out. So we're not going to see that, but I think customers will definitely get to see a little bit more latitude in some of the images, right? The little micro contrast that these GF lenses create, the transitioning of, the scene or the subject in the scene, it's really hard to put in paper, right? But until you actually see the picture, and probably don't see it until you actually print it, right? And that's where, you'll get the most benefits of medium format is to start enlarging and get it larger and larger and kind of see that, right? Without having to stand 500 feet behind just to enjoy the
One of the things we talked about before we went live was just about actually the height of the sensor and different aspect ratios, and people that like to shoot in a more 4:3 format. I mean, it's hard because you're not always comparing apples to apples, and of course, the saying goes, equivalency goes both ways too. So it depends on kind of what area you're looking at. But can you just talk a little bit about how the impact of the height of the sensor and how that fits into looking at aspect ratios?
Yeah, well, we have a 4:3 aspect ratio sensor. So I know I heard that a lot from landscape photographers, that it's actually great because you get more height in terms of the sensor. So when you frame your image, you got your width, but then you got extra on the tall side. And that means, if you have that landscape and then you had that tree that was cut off on your 3:2, well, with the medium format 4:3, you get the top of that tree, and then that's actual, physical sensor that's 4x3, so that gain is true. And then speaking in multiple formats, that's definitely a good thing, and nice thing to have, because as we said before, we were chatting before, is that you can shoot in multiple formats, and if you shoot in RAW and JPEG, when you import your image into Lightroom, for example, let's say I love to shoot in that TX1 format, the panoramic, which is 65 by 24, I think. So I love to shoot, I love to shoot in that format. And when I'm framing that image, I'm seeing in that format as if, my viewfinder is a panoramic viewfinder. But when I'm bringing it into Lightroom, I don't get like the full image, and then I need to refine my framing. Lightroom is going to give me my crop, and if I need to move it, well, then I can go back to the crop, and then it will give me, the full space of my image. So that's a nice thing. And we have multiple formats, like, we have the 4:3, the 3:2, 1:1. A lot of people love and associate medium format with square. You have the square as well. And again, if you shoot in JPEG and RAW, you get both, and it's non-destructive. So if you framed it a little bit to the left, then you can bring it, and so on and so forth.
Well, I think just to wrap everything up, I can't say it enough that for me personally, the experience of Fujifilm cameras is its own unique, set of just ways that it makes you happy when you're shooting. I'm saying that really badly, but it's basically, the experience is so good, and I always am happy with the images that I get out of it. There are some of those, quote unquote, magic qualities that they have, and I think a lot of it is a testament, again, to some of the things we talked about with the way that Fujifilm handles color science, fidelity, the gradation in the images, and then I think the biggest thing comes down to the optics. It's a lot easier to create optics, or at least it was, with the different mounts for a larger sensor that has that look. And as you were saying, Dave, you do get really nice shallow depth of field. And we're not going to get into equivalencies and that kind of thing, but I think it's something that people have to experience to fully understand. And as you were talking about, Billy, if you have the ability to print a sample out of a GFX camera, then you can see that for yourself and sort of understand that tonal quality that comes out of it.
Well, I remember shooting with a GFX-R, and even though I really didn't like the ergonomics of that camera, Billy, but I remember looking at my photos, and even just like snapshots of my kids on a playground, they just had a certain quality, a certain pop to them that I didn't get with my 35. So I'm a big fan, so thank you for improving the ergonomics drastically for this one. I appreciate that. But yeah, you do owe it to yourself to really check out the aesthetics and the difference you get going into medium format.
Yeah, and so is there anything else that you guys wanted to add?
Well, I'm just saying, Evelyn and Dave, you guys really hit the spot on what, kind of wraps on what we call value, right? And we think about, we always talk value. I say that a lot with this camera, like value proposition. And it's not just because it's this $4,000 price point, right? Or US dollars, that is. It's really just what you said, the whole experience, the idea of getting out to shoot more. And our cameras make you get out to shoot more, right? And I think that is what value is in terms of our value proposition. And I think that whole play of color science, great lenses, and again, just making people get out and shoot instead of just talk about technology or just read specs and look. Like if that's
angry,
you're happy
reading the specs, yeah.
If you're happy, I think that's kind of what value is, and I think you guys kind of hit the mark when it's about this camera. And I think that's where people will be very happy with the purchase of this, right?
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Billy, Francis. It's always a pleasure chatting with you guys. We love talking about gear with you, so thanks again for coming on. And for our viewers at home, thanks for watching. We hope that you enjoyed. Let us know if you have any other comments or questions. You can put them in the comments below afterwards, and this will be available on replay. The other thing I just wanted to mention is do check out thecamerastore.com for all of our 25th anniversary events that we have coming up, including Fujifilm's event that they're sponsoring next week. It's another GFX event. We're going to be talking about weddings. We're going to be talking about portrait photography. And so definitely check that out, and we'll catch you guys all again soon.
Sounds good, everyone. And thanks for having us.